You're about to enjoy a Cloudcast original. Local stories, local storytellers, local brands.
Have you ever felt that you as a woman may not appear to measure up when you see incredible women in strong roles? You may be surprised when hearing from women in these positions and how we all share many of the same challenges. Thank you for joining us for the CEO Leading In podcast with Rebecca Jones as we share the journeys of women.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones, your host of CEO. We are on an exploration together to discover more about the personal journeys of incredible women in both career and life. We all have paths to share that sometimes take incredible turns, deep resilience, and courage to navigate. My hopes are that the challenges shared here encourage women to take leaps of faith and growth when a journey feels too difficult or unachievable. There is great strength deep within each one of us. These stories are meant to share the ways strong women have taken their dreams to strive and thrive to new heights despite their sometimes rocky paths and found a way to lead in. Today we're here with Julie Neward, Vice President and co-founder of the California Sibling Leadership Network, founder of the Natalie Project, and appointee of Governor Newsom to the State Council of Developmental Disabilities. And that is a mouthful, Julie. Tell us a little bit about yourself. So exciting to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. It's actually a pleasure to be here today. It is a mouthful, but quite frankly, all of those three interests, they greatly intersect. I am the older sister of a woman with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She was born what we would say typical, and then fell into a coma when my mom was pregnant with her third child, my brother, and my sister was left in a coma. So, I'm almost the ripe age of 40-something, and so for most of my life, I've had a sister with very severe disabilities, and that's what I know. We say that she has high support needs, but she's cognitively like a 10-month-old. And so I spent a lot of my life realizing, I just grew up a little bit differently. And my life wasn't like other people's, like my classmates. And, the moment where these three interests really collide was on April 2nd, 2012, when and this might be sensitive for some of your listeners. I've learned to say that over time. And so I just want to make sure anybody listening knows that there's any triggers, like, some of this content might be sensitive that I say. But, I learned that my sister Natalie was being abused at an outside day program. And that just shook my world because you think people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities are, they're being taken care of, and they're being taken care of appropriately, and people love them and want the best for them. And on April 2nd, I learned that Natalie was diagnosed with an STD, and she's cognitively like a 10-month-old, and she relies on others 24/7 for care. And that just really hit me. It was the year my brother was getting married. It was the year I was getting married. And it was very painful because, as we realized, nobody treated it like a crime, and it was. So the perpetrator is still out there. The facility asked my mother to sign a settlement, one of those lovely secret settlements. I had to write the checks every month from the settlement amount for my mom, and it was like blood money. And the money ran out. And the system is the same. I can't live like that. I can't live knowing that I will one day be Natalie's caregiver and her care manager, knowing that she deserves a life. And there's a law called the Lanterman Act in California. Everybody with disabilities deserves a life and deserves to flourish. And because of this horrific crime, my mom kept Natalie home for 4 years straight. So I need to talk about myself now. I'm married with 2 young children, and I have a career in retail real estate. I've been in that for about 20 years. How do I take care of Natalie and my family and my family's needs while making sure she's safe and protected and nobody's hurting her? And I turned to the internet, like many of us do these days, and I Googled, and I typed in like sibling and support and help. And I came across a group, and they looked amazing. but they're in England. And I went, oh my gosh, there has to be something in the United States. And I came across a group called the Sibling Leadership Network. And it's a chapter-based organization. And I think about 2/3 of the states have a chapter right now. And so I looked for California on their website. And there was nothing. And I said, okay, I guess I have to start this California chapter for siblings because one day we will become the care providers of our brothers and sisters. So I started the chapter. I called my brother and I met another young woman and my brother signed the dotted line for me. And I said, thank you. And then he kind of, went off on his way. And the chapter took some time to grow, but it's grown into this amazing group. And right now it's of women, and we also would like some men on our board and involved. But it's an amazing group of women now. And I think we've been together almost 6 years. And right now our main goal is we're producing a guide. We're politely calling it the OSK or the Oh Shit Kit. And it's actually a guide to how you manage your life and the services in California for your loved one. And we're in the middle of fundraising for that. We just hosted a big event on 2 Sundays ago called Sibs in Media. And we were so happy to have Michael Kutcher. He does have a famous brother, Ashton, but Michael Kutcher was our keynote speaker and he was speaking to Sibs about the important role that we have. So this guide is very important to us, and we're, pulling all our resources together to make sure that people are supported. My biggest fear is I'm going to end up bankrupt. I'm going to end up without a job, and I'm not going to be able to provide for my family. It's a very big fear that I have. And I think a lot of siblings out there, adults, we all have that same fear of how do we balance our lives because people with disabilities used to be in institutions. And then they started closing.
Right.
And they said, okay, go back to your family. But families aren't quite prepared for this. I
I was just thinking the very same thing. They're not equipped because they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about that.
Yeah. So families aren't equipped, So here they are in the home and we're relying on people, caregivers out in the community, whether it's a group home, whether it's a day program, or maybe a one-on-one that's helping individual with disabilities. But we're relying on caregivers out in the community to help us get respite and reprieve and to make sure our loved one has a life. So when Natalie's diagnosis happened, my mom kept Natalie home for 4 years straight without any support, except for my youngest sister, my beautiful sister, Patricia, who gave up her whole life. And 24/7, they took care of Natalie. And I saw my mom age. And I thought, this is really unfair. This is unfair that the burden's on the victim and instead of the perpetrator. And this happened in 2012. It's been over 10 years. The anniversary of her diagnosis was April 2nd. When we learned this was happening, it was happening for months prior. And so I believe it was January of 2018, Joe Shapiro with NPR released a week-long series called Abused and Betrayed. And in that series, there's a segment called She Can't Tell Us What's Wrong because my sister communicates with her behavior. She doesn't use words to communicate. And he had our story featured nationally. And that's when my fire grew. And I realized who's addressing this problem and how do we address this problem? Because I, as a sibling, one day will have Natalie and want to have care for her. So will other siblings. But the fact that hits us is over 90% of people with disabilities are sexually assaulted during their lifetime, 9 out of 10. So every family in special education, everybody out there needs to know, how do we manage this? How do we respond to it? What do we do? Where do we go? Because there's secret settlements. Organizations are asking people to be quiet about it. And we can't be quiet about it. And I want to thank Tarana Burke, who I did get to meet. She spoke at St. Mary's College, and I was able to hear her speak and go up and meet her. She has the whole Me Too movement, which is such a beautiful movement. And she was able to speak to that a little bit more when we saw her speaking at St. Mary's a couple years ago. And, I've coined it now for us, the Natalie Project is the name of my project now, and it's called Them Too. We cannot forget the people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who have the highest rate of sexual assault out of any group. And again, Tarana Burke speaks to that in her TEDx talk. It's the highest rate. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. No, terrible. 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
9 out of 10.
Yeah.
It's really, that's terrible.
It is terrible. So I a bit extroverted, so I speak outward and, I make the story known. And I met a wonderful woman named Sheridan Nicolau in the Bay Area. She's with the state council's Bay Area office. And she just had this beautiful listening ear and was completely supportive. And I really want to thank her. And she was able to get me to a level now with the state, on the state council on developmental disabilities. Did my first 3 years, kind of saw how the council was running, met the movers and shakers, and saw, how government works, I would say. And now I'm going into my next 3 years, and I'm looking forward to doing more work with the council. The council is prioritizing safety. We've spoken
what
to
laws
that.
have changed since you've been on there? That's what I'm curious to know.
I know what laws have changed. It's a beautiful question. There's a law that was done. I believe it's Assemblyman Manshine in San Diego. I believe it's a vertical prosecution law. So once you find out who it is, there's a law around that. But it's all the laws that have happened are based on the prosecution side. We already know that sexual assault's underreported, and alone for a population which has disabilities, it's like never reported. We would have never known Natalie was being abused unless it was for an STD. And I know those are terrible, diseases to have, not fun diseases to have, but without it, we would have never known. So, I'm a bit religious. I've, been going to parochial school since I was 5. And, I kind of secretly thank God this happened, because if she never got this disease and if that doctor never thought to test her for it, we would have never known. They were testing her for 6 months with UTIs and yeast infections and everything else under the moon, but they never thought that somebody like her would need an STD panel. And that just shook me up, So what about the laws? I mean, that's a great point. So I teamed up with a wonderful woman in the Bay Area named Marisol Rubio. She's a politician in the Bay Area. She has a daughter who also has disabilities, has lower level support needs. But somehow we got connected through, and this is funny, but my job is managing malls, and I have this amazing mall marketing manager, and she connected me to Marisol and thought, you two should meet and connect. And so we did. And we worked our tails off, and we got a resolution prioritized by the California Democratic Party. And the resolution is around accountability and transparency in the system. It's only a resolution. It's not a law yet.
Right.
I'm in the middle of hiring a legislative consultant through the Natalie Project to assist the Natalie Project with our next couple steps. But in this system, there is no accountability and no transparency. Number one, with Natalie's case, a mandated report was never filed until I demanded it 9 years later. No, nothing ever happened. There was no support for the family, nothing. Despite my mom saying, I want to keep her at home and nobody should be around her. That doesn't mean you don't want support services and healing from the trauma. That doesn't mean you don't need help. That means you're scared and you want to run and protect your loved one who's been hurt. And so there's something in the system. So whenever an incident happens, so let me back up and tell you a little bit about the system. So in California, we have an entitlement program. And so it's through the Lanterman Act that we have this program. And there's, I believe, I want to say 21 what you call regional centers. And they're kind of like the prescription for services and supports for people with disabilities. They're on nonprofit contracts. They receive government funding, federal, state, some local funding. And that means that you and I as taxpayers are paying for people with disabilities to receive these services.
And are they getting those services? That's the question.
That's a huge question. And actually, there's a lot of conversations around that in California that I'm not a part of. Families are very frustrated. We're very frustrated. My mom is so tired and so honed in on my sister, she can't advocate on a larger level. I do that as the daughter because I see what's going on and I see the future that I'm going to have.
But Julie, think about this. Think about the families that don't have a Julie. What do they do? Their opportunities are probably quite limited if you think about that. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one.
It is a tough one. I mean, it hits a chord with me because I think about it, and I think that when I think about that, it gets too big and overwhelming, and we can only do what we can in
That's right.
in a day.
Yeah.
And so I have to think that I'm one more person out there moving in a direction of this very, very, very big, I don't know what you want to call it, ship, and we're trying to change the course slowly but surely.
Well, and the first part of that, I think, is the legislation, the laws of how you can prosecute all of this. And I love that people are out there starting to do things. I like the resolution, but how do you then make sure that there's a law that accompanies that? Because a resolution in of itself is not enough. It's really not enough. So I guess my question would be, what is your next step in that? I mean, what is your next step? Have you found someone that will say, yeah, we're going to work forward, or we're going to go forward, we're going to work to get an actual law passed? Have you found that?
I'm looking. I'm strategizing right now. Again, my career is retail real estate and property management.
Right.
So this is all new and different, and it gets a bit overwhelming at times because I don't know everything. Getting the resolution signed, I could not have done that on my own without Marisol and her help. But you're right. It is moving forward. So like I mentioned, I'm hiring a legislative consultant to help and guide me. This is somebody who's a mover, very big mover and shaker within California. And so we're finalizing a contract right now with my the Natalie Project is fiscally sponsored by a group called Social Good Fund. So we're working on that right now. But the goal is to have a law about accountability and transparency in California. And this is what we'd like to see. Any entity that receives $1 of government funding that serves people with disabilities needs to report publicly when it happened, when an incident happened, where it happened, and what was done to resolve the issue, because we don't know that right now. We don't know how big this problem is, and we know it's big.
Well, 9 out of 10. I mean, you do know that statistic, so obviously it's happening somewhere. And how is that happening? So I do have a quick question. So community care licensing, are they in charge of the actual facilities? Because I think they would be, yes. Okay. And it seems to me that they have to publicly talk about what's happening within their facilities.
Yeah. So a little story behind that, because it's personal. Yeah. Community care licensing didn't investigate until the mandated report was done for my sister 8 years after we learned that she was being abused. Why? Right. So I investigated. Again, in the regional center system, whenever there is abuse, neglect, any malpractice, there's a report that's filled out called a special incident report. Usually it's the program that's supposed to fill it out, and you're supposed to send it off to everybody, including community care licensing, I believe. And there's other entities that receive it.
And it's public record too.
Yeah. And so that triggers community licensing to investigate. Nobody filled out a special incident report in my sister's case. Not even us telling her support services professional. I told her, hey, Natalie's been abused. What do we do next? And they replied to me and said, oh, we'll try to get you extra hours. How is she acting around men? And then she mentioned she spoke with her supervisor. But nobody, that was it. Nobody above her came to talk to us or help us figure out what's going on and what's happening. So that special incident report was supposed to go to community care licensing. So I did call community care licensing. And I said, hey, listen, do you have a report on my sister Natalie? Do you have a report on her? They responded, and I clearly remember this. They said there's 2 things that could have happened. Number 1, we could have gotten it, but it never triggered us to investigate. Number 2, we're understaffed. I mean, this is about abuse. I realized the report was never sent. Nothing was ever sent to even trigger an investigation. That's the biggest problem. An investigation never happened. I did speak up recently at a state council meeting, and the director of developmental services was there, and I spoke up about the importance of siblings and the importance of what we're calling an epidemic of sexual assault amongst people with disabilities. And again, Joe Shapiro with NPR clearly uncovered this nationally.
Right. Yeah.
And I thank him for that. I deeply thank him for that. But, what are we doing about it? So the department is starting a subgroup on abuse. I was a part of a first meeting. It was a very small group, which was nice. And it was very intimate. And it appears to be a group that wants to see action and get something done. So I'm hoping something happens within the State Department, but we do need more laws. The Accountability and Transparency Law I did submit to the State Council as what in their bill idea contest that they hosted. They did prioritize it, but we're still working on the next couple steps there, and we'll see what happens.
So Julie, you are an advocate. You are your sister's advocate, which is very cool. And, if you think about, our listeners out there today, what can they take away from this? Well, one of the things I think is that when you see something that you believe in, you need to actually follow that path and wherever it takes you. I mean, who thought you would be doing what you're doing right now? And the fact that you're now an appointee by the governor, Governor Newsom, that's a big deal. And the fact that you're not giving up and you are following through on this, because it's obviously something that you're very passionate about, which is amazing. But it's a tough thing too. I can see in your heart that you're really moved by all of this. And as I am, and I know our listeners will be too, because this is a heavy subject matter, but there's also hope in trying to figure out a resolution and a way to help I call them differently abled folks. There is hope in that. So let's talk a little bit about who's helping you. So you're talking about, it seems that there are women and men, and they kind of look at you and go, okay, she's got the passion. I'm going to kind of let her take the lead and let her go and see what she can do, which I do really, really like that. However, you do need people to come alongside you, to champion you. And I know emotionally it's got to be really tough. And, I just have to tell you, I have to commend you. And I really have a lot of respect for you and really believe in what you're doing. And thank God you've got a heart for this. And thank God you have a heart for turning beauty from something that is so, just a really sad situation.
It is. It is a sad situation. What do I want your listeners to take away, right? Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, your podcast is about empowering, right? And taking lead. I want to mention that doesn't come without highs and lows. This isn't
True.
Easy work, okay?
Yeah.
It's not easy. I get inspired by music. I get inspired by my children and seeing them interact with people. But really, at the end of the day, the takeaway is this work needs to be done. And if I don't do it, and if somebody else doesn't do it, who's going to do it? It's really our problem as society to solve this issue. A key driver for me is I once heard somebody say at the Capitol, there was a bill for people with disabilities and there was a bill for pets. And there was a line for the bill for pets. And that's beautiful. But on the same token, we have people with disabilities that need us. And really, if disability doesn't touch your life, it may. Because I am politely reminded, and Sheridan Nicolau reminded me of this, the one minority group any of us could belong to at any time in our life is the disability group. Any time in our life, we could become disabled. You hurt your back, you break your arm, you're disabled. It's temporary, but you have a disability at that point. We have to remember that disability does touch upon all of us. And there's a very strong movement going on. And I am trying to learn more about the term ableism. I'm kind of just learning and watching people and seeing what's going on with the movement and how can I embrace it, The disability work is so deeply entrenched in your family and in your culture that sometimes you don't understand that what you're saying may be hurting progress, right? So I think number one, it's people becoming aware.
Yeah, education.
Yeah.
Yep.
People becoming aware that people with disabilities have their own movement going on. You may not hear from them, but do educate yourself, about ableism. There's plenty of TED Talks on it. There's a wonderful woman in San Diego named Diana Pastora Carson. She has a podcast called Beyond Awareness, and she teaches at San Diego State. I'm actually a guest speaker in her class tomorrow night. She's done a lot of work around this, and she fought really hard. She has a TEDx talk. She's a beautiful person that has this amazing podcast and really wants the youth to understand and be more inclusive of people with disabilities, because at the end of the day, when we become more aware at a younger age, it'll be easier for us to get supports and needs for people with disabilities like my sister to be met. Number 2, it's employment. It's not really one of the flags that I carry, but it is important for people with disabilities to have employment so they are in front of people in society, making your coffee, sweeping a hallway, filling envelopes. Like, people with disabilities need employment. They have the highest unemployment rate. I know unemployment right now because I work in mall management. Like, everybody's hiring, and people with disabilities, this is their key opportunity to find roles in front of people so that we can start bridging the gaps on the awareness and getting much more comfortable,
Yeah, like there are places like the Arc, and I had gone on a tour a couple of years ago, and they actually had a program where they had, an employment program where they have folks that are doing these jobs, putting things together. It was actually putting together cell phone boxes, and they get paid for that. And I think, depending on their abilities, I think there is a lot of, parallels with people that don't have disabilities, and we need a sense of purpose.
Yes.
And depending on what those abilities are, obviously for your sister, if she's 10 months old in her mind, but she's got a big girl body, obviously she can't go and she's not able to do something like that. But there are a lot of people that are. And I look at, kind of what, and I actually grew up, just to kind of give you a background, I grew up, and one of my friends from elementary school, we used to walk over to her mom ran a facility that was for folks with Down syndrome. And I remember we would go and we'd hang out with them and we'd play games. And I remember thinking to myself, I love hanging out with them. They're like young people, like a kid, it's like you're hanging out with a kid. And I thought it was really fun. So I never had that fear thing. There are a lot of our kids that truly have a fear because they don't understand, because their parents aren't teaching them. And back to what you said a little bit earlier, education, a lot of the education comes with the integration. And, when we're making strives to integrate, to expose our kids to people that are differently abled, I think there will be more acceptance. And then they can actually do jobs that are more out in the community because there will be more acceptance. But truly, I think what you're doing is really remarkable. And I think you're going to do a lot more in this space, which I love. And so I guess for our listeners, and, our young entrepreneurs, our women that are kind of like going, I don't really know where my place is. What are some things that you would share with them as something that you've actually learned during all of this, what they could actually help, how they can help and figure out what their passion is, if it is something in this nonprofit space? I know that's a loaded question and you might need to think it through, but truly, I just feel really compelled that you would be able to share something with our listeners today. Because it's very different from, your actual, your day job, I guess I would call it, being in the nonprofit space.
Yeah, it is much different. So advice for your listeners who are looking for their next step or their passion.
Yeah, if they're into this, I have a passion about this. And I actually thought it was really cool when you talked about you went on and you Googled and you just kept Googling to try to figure out if there was some sort of support for you.
Yeah, I'm really okay. So really, what I'm doing in my theme here is it's community building. Right. That's what you're doing is you're building community. You're getting like-minded people together. You're connecting with them. You're supporting them. But then by building community, you really end up shaping people's lives. And I think that's what it's really all about. It's shaping people's lives. So, we've built a board for California Sibs of like-minded individuals who, have found relevance in their story. So it's what's your story? And what do you think makes you relevant? And what do you for me, it's just talk to everybody. Talk to everybody and see who you connect with and see what you have, what commonalities you have, and try to figure out, what direction you want to move in. And I got to tell you, it's not like completely intentional. Like it's unintentional. Sometimes you just have to trust that things will come to you over time. If you just keep putting out good intentions, something will build and people will follow you and you'll be able to make some changes. I think, I never intended to create a nonprofit. That wasn't even on my mind, to be very honest with you. And it really became a nonprofit when our president of California Sibs came on board, Kaylin Ferris. I just put a website up. It was me and my kids and Natalie in a picture. And I said, join us. We're meeting up, at this pizzeria. Let's start connecting and let's start talking. And it's grown over time, but there is a lot more work that needs to be done. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. We're looking at applying for a grant. We want an executive director. We want somebody else to help us with the day-to-day and drive the organization forward. We'll hopefully get a grant and be looking for talent there. The Natalie Project's moving forward, and we're looking at doing a documentary about Natalie's 40th birthday over Labor Day and really documenting her life and the tragedy that happened to her. Because at the end of the day, everybody is really wanting to share their story, right? You're allowing me to share my story, and I thank you for that today. But it's the stories that shape people. People are on TikTok for 30 seconds, but that's shaping people's lives, right? Instagram, Facebook, Netflix. How many people watch Netflix during COVID?
Everyone.
now there's movies on Netflix about being, stuck at home with COVID happening. But really it's stories, and it's finding a way to tell the stories and get it out there. Because I really believe that once we get the stories out there, more people will connect. It's not a PSA. It's not a public service announcement. It's telling stories. And I think that's how we're going to shape. So it's trying to understand, what's my story and what story do I want to get out there?
And what lessons have you learned along the way? Because I'm sure there have been plenty of them.
There's several lessons. The first lesson is balance, right? That's a fun word. I hate that word.
Well, and it's different for every person, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I go, oh my gosh, I have no balance in my life. And then other days I'm like, oh, I'm killing it in the balance.
Yes.
It's a moving target, right?
Totally is. But it's really being able to refill your cup. And I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible. But I'm trying to do better at it. But really it's making sure that you're, eating right and exercising and drinking water and balancing, because you can burn out. It is a lot of work to do advocacy. It is a lot of work. And we're trying to move mountains, at the base of a mountain. We're trying to push it instead of climbing to the top. And it's hard work, and we have to climb it, and it's day by day. I would say the next thing is just forming relationships. I love talking to people. I love their stories. My personality is an ENFP. I'm a campaigner, and I love to know what drives people. I don't need to know where you live. I don't need to know what car you have. How do you want to change the world? And what are you doing to make the world a better place? And really it's about giving people confidence. It's making sure people know that they are supported. I think us as women sometimes, and I've heard it on your podcast, but we can compare ourselves. We can feel like we're not good enough. At the end of the day, we have a path and we have cards, and that's what we play. And you don't worry about anybody else. You take those cards and you run with it. And I've been given the disability advocacy card, through my sibling relationship. And I've realized throughout my life that there's been injustices that I don't appreciate and I don't like, and they directly impact me and my family. So it's very personal to me. And then I've realized I'm not the only one, and then I've realized there's dire needs in the community and we need help. The disability advocacy community, we need so much help and we need so much more momentum because there's so much that needs to be disclosed to us as family members that isn't being disclosed to us. It's not fair, And that's the beauty, I think, of us starting to tell our stories is people need to see what's really happening.
Right. And then as you share your story, you're giving courage to other women and men to say, you know what? I have a story to share. I have something that happened in my life that I can actually talk about now because it gives people courage and hope. Hope because you're trying to make a difference, which is not easy. We all know how tough that is because also, it does take a toll on your family. It's not easy. It's not easy being the champion of and advocating for anyone, even if it's someone within your immediate family or even your extended family. That is a tough thing to do. But I think you're sharing this today is actually a giver of hope, shall we say. So, okay, you walk into a room and it's all women, okay? Young women that are kind of saying, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to go? How can I move forward in what I'm doing? And you did actually bring it up a little bit earlier. I think one of the points I think that's really important is you got to keep moving forward, even if it's honestly whether you're there's that Martin Luther King Jr. quote, which I love. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. And then it's something, and I don't remember it exactly, but if whatever you're doing, you've got to keep moving forward. And sometimes it seems fast, and other times it seems tedious and very slow. And I think that is one of the things that is really important that you actually talked about earlier. But you walk in and you say, okay, I'm going to give you some advice. What would that advice be? Do you have any advice that you would just say, these are things that you never need to forget?
Yes.
What would that be?
I hired a life coach early on. Didn't know what I was doing with my life. Met him through a professional group, became his client. He convinced me to move from Northern California to San Diego, and I was scared to leave.
Leap of faith here. Leap of faith. You didn't have any family here, did you?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No. I applied for grad school and I moved. And he said, do it. And I said, okay, how do I pay for it? I relied on my parents quite a bit. And I said, okay, I'll take out loans. And that's what I did. Best time in my life. This life coach, I owe him to this day. And here's the advice. Here's what your listeners need to know. Here's what the women in the audience need to know. There's a beautiful poem by Marianne Williamson. And I don't remember it word for word yet, but the gist of it is our light that scares us the most, not the darkness. It is the fact that we are unstoppable that scares us. And this is actually something I'm currently trying to encounter is how do we keep feeding the light and understanding that the darkness needs to be ignored, right? I get scared of how big this could be. I get scared of how big this could be. I know it can get bigger, that disability advocacy. I know I can do more, but I'm scared. And there's a lot of fear involved, but there's people around you that want to support you, that want you to succeed. And it is moving forward. I did have a family member tell me early on, don't waste your time. Focus on your family. You can't solve all the world's problems. Basically, that's the gist of what I was told. And I took that as fuel.
I'm glad you didn't take that advice.
No, I didn't. I didn't take it. That feeds me. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove to you that one person can make a difference. I believe. And look, I don't want to say it's all me. Like there's a lot of people that support me.
Well, it's one person that has the passion to bring other people together. Again, back to the hope and courage. And, it is one person. It really is one person. It starts with one person. Every movement does.
It's amazing.
Yep.
It's kind of scary thinking that, It is. I mean, it's taking a leap of faith. There's no playbook on disability advocacy. There's no playbook on this, on how this goes. I'm still learning more about the system, and I'm learning more from other advocates. It's a journey to still be written. And I think that we'll make great strides. I'm confident we'll make great strides. There's going to be sacrifices along the way, and I have to choose what those sacrifices are and whether it's, the glass of wine after I'm celebrating a big event and not working out, it's a sacrifice after I told everybody to eat right and drink lots of water. But, life happens. And I think it's realizing you have a life to live and you have to take care of yourself and you have to understand what your priorities are. And I always have to constantly remind myself to really reprioritize my family and also reprioritize myself and what I need. So again, to the group of young women, it's read the poem by Marianne Williamson because it speaks to me. It is the brightness that kind of scares me sometimes of how big this could get. And can I handle it? Can I handle it? And what it has to be sacrificed when your light keeps shining. What do you have to give up to let that happen? And what are you willing to let go of?
I also heard you talk about relationships and connections.
Yeah,
it's
relationships. Really yeah. I'm going to give you a quick example because this is kind of where my life got to at one point. There was a women's march in my hometown, Walnut Creek. And I, gosh darn, knew people there would be interested in disability advocacy, right? So I set up a booth. My daughter had a soccer game. And I'm like, well, I can't miss the soccer game. How do I get this booth? How do I have somebody staff this booth? Because I can't be there right now.
Right.
I hired somebody through TaskRabbit. And I had her stand there while I was at my daughter's soccer game. I mean, it's really understanding if you want to be somewhere, how do you leverage your resources to be able to do that? And that's a craft and that's a skill that you have to cultivate as you move on in your advocacy is how do I start having other people help me? I can't do it all by myself. And it's realizing you
for it. You've got to ask for it.
Yeah, you really do.
Yeah. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. What a great conversation. And I'm really, really proud of you. I really am. I love what you're doing. And I love that you're using something that is not something we want to talk about, something that's very negative, but making something very positive out of it. So thank you for that. Thank you for having the courage and giving people hope.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Now that was powerful. We hope you've been lifted and encouraged by today's inspiring voice. Always remember that life doesn't look exactly the same for each one of us. Never stop dreaming, striving, and thriving. In future episodes, we look forward to bringing you powerful stories from amazing women who learn how to lead in to challenges. Thank you for listening and being part of our community with SheEO host, Rebecca Jones.
You have been listening to a Cloudcast original. Local stories, local storytellers, local brands. Find more stories at cloudcast.us.